I've played thousands of Blitz games, and there's one opening I keep coming back to. Not because it's flashy, but because it works. It wins fast, punishes lazy development, and puts your opponent on the back foot from move 3. I'm talking about a line that's crushed titled players and clueless speed demons alike. If you want an opening that's easy to learn and brutal to face, this is it. And once you see how it unfolds, you'll understand why I call it my personal cheat code for Blitz. Let's get into it. It starts with pawn to b3, then bishop to b2. You won't see this setup every day, but it's super straightforward and surprisingly dangerous. Most opponents aren't ready for it, and it hides sharp tactics just beneath the surface. Usually your opponent plays something like e5, but that doesn't change your plan. Your bishop on b2 now points straight down the diagonal, aiming at e5 early on, but that's just the start. As the game unfolds, especially if they castle kingside, that pressure shifts toward their king, and in many games that slow buildup leads to a win just a few moves later. If they defend a 5 with ci6, you simply play e3 and stick to the plan. The whole setup revolves around keeping pressure on that long diagonal. To increase the heat on e5, you can bring your knight to f3 as a second attacker. Another option is developing your light-squared bishop to challenge their knight on c6. Since it's a key defender of e5, pressuring it adds tension. Then when the moment's right, you strike with d4, opening the center and clearing the way for your bishop to take over. That's the core strategy. Now your opponent might develop normally with standard moves or challenge the center directly with d5. Don't worry, we'll cover how to handle each of these responses. Now, if they play bishop to c5, a common move but not strong in this setup, you respond with bishop to b5. That puts pressure on their knight on c6, which is guarding f5, building tension without directly touching the pawn. Black usually tries d6 to hold things together, but that already gives you an edge. You strike with d4, attacking both the bishop and e5, and setting up the powerful idea of d5. Even as pieces are traded, your threats stay alive. Once the bishop retreats, you push d5, and just like that, you're ahead. The game can slip from their hands in just a few moves. Now, once you've played d5, things start falling apart for your opponent. Their knight is under pressure. That's one issue. But the bigger problem, your bishop on b2 is laser focused on the g7 pawn. If they're not careful, there's no way to stop you from taking that pawn and grabbing the rook in the corner too. That's a huge material gain. If they play d5 early, you switch to a Dutch-like setup. With white, you still control the center, aim for a knight on a 5, and build a strong kingside attack. Now back to the line where they play a 5, which is still the most popular reply. After bishop to b2, you're already hitting that central pawn. They usually defend it, and then you play e3, a flexible move that keeps multiple options open. On your next turn, you can decide whether to develop your pieces or strike in the center, depending on how they react. Now let's say they continue normally and bring out their knight to f6, just standard development. You answer with knight to f3, doubling the pressure on the e5 pawn. In most cases, they'll reinforce it with d6, creating that familiar pawn wall in front of your bishop. That's not ideal for us. We want our bishop on b2 to stay active and dangerous. So in these positions, it's often best to break open the center with pawn d4. Once the trades happen and the center clears up, your bishop comes back to life. After the exchange, your knight stands strong, and if they capture it, you can retake with the queen, lining up a deadly queen-bishop battery aimed at the king side. Suppose they follow up with bishop to a 7. You keep developing, and here's a key idea. Once your queen is out early in this setup, castling queenside is usually the way to go. It sets you up for a strong kingside offensive. And here comes the trick. Once both sides have castled, you drop your knight onto 5, blasting open the diagonal. Now, if they casually take your knight, thinking it's just a trade, they've walked into disaster. You don't take back. Instead, you go queen takes g7, checkmate. What makes this setup strong isn't just the flashy mate, it's the positional pressure. One key goal is trading off their dark-squared bishop. Once it's gone, your bishop dominates the long diagonal. Black's already under pressure. If you castle queenside and they start a pawn storm with a 5, don't panic. Even if the queenside opens, they have no real threats. You're safe. Even if they try to be clever and take the g4 pawn with their bishop, thinking they're winning material and attacking your rook, it actually backfires. By doing that, they open the g-file, and now your rook is perfectly placed to jump into the attack. You don't even need to defend. Now they're in trouble. You're threatening to take the bishop, and if it captures your rook on d1, there are a few powerful ways to strike back. One option is to take on f6, using the fact that the g7 pawn is still pinned. That alone gives you a huge edge. Your bishops become monsters, the position collapses, and you're completely in control. An even nastier idea is to ignore f6 capture and swing your rook or queen to the king side, piling on pressure. Black's overloaded. Every piece is under fire. If they move the bishop, you take on f6 anyway. The pawn's pinned, the queen's attacked, and everything collapses. And if the queen tries to escape, queen takes h7 ends the game on the spot. Now, a lot of players will try to fight back attack by pushing d5, grabbing space in the center. And yes, central control matters, but this one has a flaw. It weakens their setup. You immediately strike with bishop to b5, pinning the knight. Suddenly, bishop takes a5 becomes a real threat. If they miss it or waste a move, you just win the central pawn, and the position crumbles from there. Thanks to the pin on the knight at c6, you don't even need to waste time trading it off. You can go straight for the e5 pawn. It's completely undefended, and the knight can't move. Most players will spot this and try to cover it by playing bishop to d6, which is actually a logical developing move. But you respond with pawn f4, aiming to break down their center completely, and this is where things get messy for black. Remember, most opponents won't know this position. They're seeing it for the first time, and now they're in a sharp tactical battle. It's easy to slip. A lot of players will impulsively capture the f4 pawn, not realizing your bishop on b2 is lurking. As soon as they do, the diagonal opens up, and boom, you take the pawn on g7. Not casually, but with purpose, attacking the rook in the corner, and they can't save it. Some players even try bishop to a5, thinking they'll recapture your bishop on h8, but that's just a blunder. They're giving up a piece for free. You take the bishop, and they realize too late that their knight was pinned the whole time. It can't defend anything. Another clean win for you. Now, queen to h4 is probably their best try, but even that doesn't change much. Sure, your king is in check, but just sidestep it. After that, they're still losing the rook. If they grab the pawn on e3, the only thing you really need to watch out for is queen to f2 checkmate. So don't rush to take the rook right away. It's not going anywhere. You've got time. A simple and safe move is to recapture with your pawn on a 3 first, and then take the rook next move. That wins easily. Want an even smoother finish? Drop your queen to e1, inviting a trade. Since you're about to win a rook, it simplifies things and kills any counterplay. If they trade, great. If not, even better. You take the pawn with check, chase the king, and end up in a dominant winning position. Once you push pawn f4 and target their pawn on a 5, the pressure becomes intense. That pawn is frozen. It can't be pushed or captured without opening the long diagonal, which would lead to major material loss. So black is forced to defend it. Surprisingly, the most natural-looking move, queen to a7, seems helpful at first. It develops the queen and adds another defender to a5, but it turns out to be far from ideal. You simply continue with knight to f3, increasing the pressure. And the core issue remains unchanged. The e5 pawn still can't move, because doing so would uncover an attack on g7. So once again, black scrambles for a way to hold the position and usually ends up playing f6. But that just weakens things further and sets the stage for your next attack. Once they lock down the e5 pawn with f6, it's time to shift focus. Now you turn your attention to the d5 pawn and bring your knight to c3. Remember, we mentioned earlier that their central setup looks strong, but it's actually full of pressure points. They'll usually respond with bishop to e6, patching things up for the moment. That's your cue to castle. Meanwhile, their position is still full of problems. Development is awkward, and queenside castling looks dangerous. They'd be castling straight into your pressure, and you can rip open their pawn cover easily. Trying to untangle, many players go for a 6, hoping to break the pin on the knight, but that move backfires. After you trade off your bishop, you expose one of their key weaknesses, and this is where a classic tactic kicks in. You start by taking on e5, then follow up with knight takes c5. And no, you're not sacrificing. This is calculated. Well, if they take the knight with their bishop, you strike with queen to h5, creating a deadly double threat. Now you're threatening to recover the bishop and grab a key pawn, wrecking their position in the process. Some opponents may try to hold on with bishop to 7, thinking the queen covers everything, but this is where you go full Mikhail Tal. Don't slow down. Let them take your bishop and hit back with queen takes c5, check. You tear open their defense and the attack flows in. The game ends with you in total control and winning with flair. Let's say they try to block with a knight. No problem, we stay aggressive. Bring the rook to f1, adding more pressure. When their queen moves out of the way, you follow up with bishop to a 3, and now queen takes a 7 is unstoppable. Whether it ends in checkmate or just a huge material gain, the result is a winning position. Here's something to think about. If instead of blocking with the knight, they play queen to a 7, can that save them? Try to find white's best continuation. You won't get checkmate right away, but the advantage should still be clear. Now back to the main line. Black pushes d5 to control the center. You respond with bishop to b5, pinning the knight and threatening the pawn on a 5. As usual, you'll be preparing f4 to open up the center and unleash your dark squared bishop. Black knows this and usually responds with f6 to block the diagonal and reinforce the e5 pawn. Once you see that the e5 pawn is locked down and the diagonal is shut, you shift focus. You play knight to c3 to target the d5 pawn instead. When they defend that, you've got a tactical idea ready. Trade on e5, then jump in with queen to h5. This move lands just before they can castle, and now they have to weaken their position. They can't block with the knight, or they lose the d5 pawn, and their whole center crumbles. That's why most players go for g6, but this creates big holes around their king. Technically, they might be able to hold this position if they defend perfectly, but practically, it's a nightmare to play as black. You've got threats like queen to f6, hitting soft spots, or knight to g5 going after the bishop. The dark squares are still weak, the king is exposed, and your pressure just keeps growing. If they castle here, knight to g5 ends it on the spot. Threatening queen takes h7 mate, and knight takes c6, which forks the queen and rook. This shows just how difficult it is for black to survive if they make even the smallest mistake in this line. And that's why this opening hits so hard. It's not about memorizing endless theory. It's about understanding a system that works. You create pressure early, punish careless moves, and force your opponent into uncomfortable positions from the very start. It's flexible, it's aggressive, and once you learn the patterns, you'll start seeing wins pile up faster than ever, especially in fast time controls. So whether you're facing someone who blitzes out their prep or a casual player who's just winging it, this setup gives you the tools to take control and dominate. If you've made it this far, you've already got the edge. Now it's your turn to put it on the board and watch the victories roll in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.